Hi, I'm Natalie Phillips-Mason, and this is the Open Wired podcast. Through respectful curiosity, we have candid conversations that explore human diversity and how to create inclusive ecosystems for all minds, bodies, and identities. My guests are change makers who are doing the practical, sometimes unglamorous work to make inclusion real. In case we haven't met, I'm Natalie, founder of Inclusive Change. I champion human talent with a neurodiversity lens, using my background in organisational change management to help organisations value and normalise human differences. We have a strong focus on sensory-friendly working, and sensory friendliness will come into almost every conversation we talk about. Today's discussion tackles a behavioural element in the retail sector that is playing out every day for retail workers. People who are customer-facing and people who are working behind the scenes. Accelerated since COVID, we discussed the latest report into customer aggression in retail, what's working and what's not, the impact on retail employee inclusion and psychosocial hazards in retail environments. Today's guest is Professor Gary Mortimer. Gary is a Professor of Retail Marketing and Consumer Behaviour at Queensland University of Technology. With over 25 years of retail industry experience, he's currently Chair and Independent Director of Services and Creative Skills Australia, which is the federally funded Jobs and Skills Council. Gary is a leading industry commentator and a widely published researcher. Open Wired is recorded on the land of the Boonwurrung people. We acknowledge the richness and diversity of Indigenous communities and the wisdom of storytelling that has been passed down from generation to generation. We pay our respects to elders past and present. Open Wired conversations are for interest only. A reminder that we do not provide medical or clinical advice, medical assessments or diagnoses, legal or employee relations advice. Please consult with a qualified healthcare provider or other relevant professional for specific concerns related to your mental health or any medical conditions. If you do need a transcript, that will be available via Apple Podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. Thank you for coming along to chat today, Gary.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for your time. It's great to chat.
So you and I met through our interest in the retail sector, which is one of the largest employers in Australia. But today's conversation touches on a really topical and really challenging aspect of working and leading in retail, and that's customer aggression. Before we get into the research and the specifics about the insights, let's start with your background, because once upon a time you were a retail worker. So tell me a little bit about your journey from industry to academia.
Yeah, I guess it's been a long journey. I left school at 15. I finished grade 10 and wanted to get out. I emigrated from the UK, growing up in a rather working class suburb of north of Brisbane in Strathpine, being a little British boy with a British accent, which I've now completely lost. Was kind of tough, and I didn't like school. I spent a lot of time away from the school, so I couldn't wait to get out. And my father at the time said, well, you need to get out and get yourself a job. And I was 15, and off I went wandering around a local shopping centre with my little very small CV and handing it out. And eventually I got a job working for Big W, pushing shopping trolleys. So I started with trolleys, moved into checkouts, and then moved into the menswear department. And then from there, worked for Roger David, ended up at Big W for a while, worked for Myer and Grace Brothers in Sydney. And then in the last sort of 10 years of my career was with Coles, and particularly Coles Express, their fuel and convenience division. Throughout that time, went off and did some more studies. I finally completed a couple of degrees and then rolled into a job with QT around about 16 years ago. Now very focused on researching consumer behaviour and retail marketing.
In terms of your retail experience, any particular lessons you learnt along the way that you still carry today?
Well, listen, I guess I entered academia, which is a fabulous job. As a single parent with very young kids at the time, I needed something that was flexible, and retail wasn't flexible. My job at retail was 7 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock at night. It was late nights, it was weekends, it was public holidays, and particularly with Coles Express, it was convenience service stations, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and I'd work Christmas Day as well sometimes. So I rolled into academia. And I went, well, I can work from home 3 or 4 days a week, and I've got lots more flexibility, which is great for picking and dropping off kids. But I approached my time in the same way that I did with retail, and retail is very disciplined. They always say retail is detailed. So 7 o'clock you start, and at 8 o'clock you do this, and at 10:30 you do this. So I was very routine, and I sort of approached my academic career with the same sort of time, I guess, commitments I did when I was in retail. And I think what that did is sort of enabled me to sort of produce a lot more work very quickly, and I promoted very quickly to a professor level sort of within 9 years, which was great. But now I still love what I do, and I still get a chance to work with industry, which I think is vitally important for academics.
Absolutely. And so that leads quite nicely into the research. And so the latest research study that's been published through Skills and Creative Services Australia is on customer aggression. And we've seen quite a bit of that escalating, I think, over the last few years. But can you start by kind of telling us, how is aggression actually defined in the research? Is it only physical? Is it physical and verbal? How's that defined?
Yeah, it's really interesting. We undertook some research around about 4 or 5 years ago to really look at what is aggression in a retail services sector. And it wasn't just the physical stuff, the stuff that gets reported on the news, the pushing, the shoving, the hitting, the throwing items at a team member. And that's quite directed physical aggression. There's also the verbal elements of aggression too. So swearing, being racist, harassing. But there's also subtle forms of harassment and aggression we found as well in the research. So things like using your height to intimidate someone, standing inside their personal space, standing at the front of a store, staring in at a store, waiting in the car park for a team member to leave the store. All those sort of threatening behaviours sort of fell into that as well. And what we also found, a lot of these behaviours resulted from a situational factor, so an out of stock or crowding or a line at the checkouts. Some was actually proactive, Nat. So people actually went in with the intentions to become abusive, and it was, I'll come in and I'll be very threatening because I want the upgrade, or I want to sit at a particular table, or I want a refund. And rather than come in and be pleasant and reasonable, if I come in aggressive, I'm more likely going to get a response that works for me.
And is that what the research actually said, that people felt that they were going to get the outcome they wanted through displaying those aggressive behaviours? Or is that a bit of a psychological component of what the research was kind of indicating through the outcomes?
Yeah, I mean, we found 2 types across the verbal and the physical. One was proactive, one was reactive. And the reactive is clearly crowding at the checkouts, or my favourite product's out of stock, so I'm going to react to something. The other stuff was very proactive. So I want to get an upgrade on my next flight. So if I'm a little bit more assertive or a little more aggressive with the flight attendant when I'm checking in, I might get that. I don't want to sit near the window. I want to sit over here. So if I'm a bit more aggressive, or I stand on top of someone like a waiter or a concierge, I'll get what I want. So there was proactive reasons and also reactive reasons why we were seeing these forms of aggression.
And so does the research give us an indication as to why we're seeing more behaviours apart from what you've just described, which is people think they're going to get the outcome? Was this something we saw escalating after COVID, for example?
Yeah, it's really interesting. The narrative is COVID was the time where we started to see these behaviours spike. But when you look at the data, that's not entirely true. So a lot of the SDA data predates 2020 to 2022, 2023. It predates the time where we closed down retail and non-essential retail and services, cafes, restaurants, bars, theatres. It shows consistently there's been higher rates of aggression growing progressively over the last decade. I think the pandemic was a time where we actually started to report more of it. And that was because we had, kids that were 15, 16, 17 at the front of a store, and they were saying, I need to see your app to show that you've been vaccinated, or there's a sneeze screen here. You need to stand 1.5 metres away from the next person. So that created a bit of tension. So Certainly situational factors. If you talk to some of the retail experts, they'll say, well, it's situational. It's the unknown item in the bagging area will trigger somebody. Psychologists will say that these types of increasing forms of aggression and abuse tend to be because of narcissism or substance abuse. And that probably addresses some small elements of it. But you would imagine when you look at the numbers, 87% of team members report being abused on a regular basis. You wouldn't think 87% of customers have substance abuse issues or narcissism.
No.
My view is, for the more contemporary view, is that some of this is sociological. It's deeply entwined within society today.
So 87% of team members reported that they'd had some form of aggression. That's what the research showed.
Yeah, it's a pretty frightening number. This is the latest SDA,
Wow.
Shop Assistant Distribution Allied Workers Union, and they survey every sort of 3 to 4 years. You can see these numbers creep up. 60% physical abuse, very, very high rates of sexual harassment or harassment of a sexual nature. Very high rates, 45% were of a cultural nature, so, racism essentially.
Okay, so very frighteningly high numbers. So what are retail businesses doing to address it, and particularly around keeping their staff safe? What's working and what's not working?
Yeah, it's really interesting because this is an important issue for retailers and for businesses in general. So you think about the local fast food, McDonald's, Hungry Jack's, the local cafe, the local sort of hotel. It impacts sort of transportation, Uber drivers, bus drivers. So businesses are really focused on what do we do to control. The one thing that we see most businesses doing today, and clearly it doesn't work because the numbers just seem to keep going up, and that's the signs. And we've all seen them. It's the, your sign at the front of the store. It's the sign at the point of sale that says, abusive, aggressive behaviour will not be tolerated. Please respect our staff. I walked into a store a couple of days ago and there's a sign at the very front of the store that said, please give our staff the respect that they deserve. The signs don't work because if they did work, we wouldn't be having this conversation. These numbers wouldn't be as high as they are. And the reason they don't work is because of this notion of reactance theory. As individuals, if we feel that our own choices, our freedoms are being controlled in some way, we're being told how to behave, we tend to do quite the opposite. In fact, we ignore it or we actually behave in the opposite way. So the signs don't work. They're pleasant to have. Maybe they provide some form of confidence to team members and the boss is looking after me. But from a customer's perspective, they don't really work. We've seen retailers roll out body-worn cams, and this is really interesting. I looked at this from a research perspective. There was no research anyway in the retail services literature that talked about the effectiveness of body-worn cams in keeping team members safe or increasing perceptions of safety or mitigating abusive behaviours. And I remember speaking to a couple of retailers and they were rolling them out, and I said, I'd really love to see your data. I sort of got pushed around a bit from one person to the next. I never actually saw the data. And I do genuinely think that maybe some retailers have got some concerns about the effectiveness of these types of devices. When you think about a body-worn cam, you think about a police officer or a security guard or a train guard. We did do a systematic literature review, and we only found, again, policing or train guard, security guard literature, corrective services officers literature. And it shows that, body-worn cams either had no effect, so an agitated individual will continue to be agitated or aggressive, or in worst case scenarios, it actually created a backfiring effect. So a really angry person, once you flick that switch on, the camera goes on, it just inflames the situation. So I think there's some concerns about that. Things that do work, we found that adding extra CCTV in ways that team members could see the extra cameras and customers could see the extra cameras, we found that it actually made team members feel safer. We didn't look at whether or not it reduced aggression, but it made team members feel safer. It reduced job stress, and so did security guards. So having a uniformed security guard in the store somewhere near the service area made team members feel safer in coming to work and serving customers.
It's interesting, isn't it? It's probably a far cry from your experience as a 15-year-old or even a 20-year-old in retail. It certainly wasn't my experience, and I've worked in retail as well. So given that the retail sector employs around 10% of the Australian population, and it is, as you described, there are opportunities there from teens in their first paid job all the way through to we've got people in their 70s and 80s who are still working in retail in terms of front of house and back of house roles. So let's talk about the impact on what these high levels of aggression are having on staff. And particularly I'm interested in whether there are groups of employees who are more vulnerable in the current climate. So that could include, younger people. Is there some gender-based levels of vulnerability, and potentially what the research showed or what your perspective is on that, and whether there are higher levels of discrimination for certain groups of employees?
Yeah, when we look at the sociological reasons as to why we see increasing levels of abuse and aggression, one of them comes out around this notion of low status shield. The young kid that's trying to serve me my fast food order through the drive-thru's made a mistake. It's just a kid. He's 15, 16. They don't have much status. They're just a kid. And the young woman that's packed my groceries incorrectly at the checkout. What we tend to find is particular groups, so young people, international students or migrant workers, women, females, but also people with disabilities and psychosocial disabilities. The research shows that they're 4 times more likely to become abused. It may be something as simple as a young person or someone with a disability might get nervous, might make a mistake, and suddenly there's a reaction, and that sort of only increases their level of anxiety. The outcome of that is really quite challenging. I think this is what worries retailers the most. It makes retail and services roles, which are really roles that most young people start in as they're heading through high school and into university, it makes them really unattractive. And the research clearly shows, certainly in our research, higher levels of willingness to look for another job, lack of organisational commitment. So they want to leave the area. And not only do they want to leave the area, they don't even want to start in the area. They don't want to start in the sector. So, you imagine you're a grocery retailer and you're trying to get young people to come to work for you. The very first thing their parents are telling them is, don't go work in a service environment. The same thing happens, I imagine, in fast food restaurants as well. So yes, there are particular groups that are highly exposed to these types of behaviours, but overall, the issue is it makes the retail and services sector a really unattractive area to work for, particularly for young people and particularly for those groups. And it makes it very difficult for retailers and service providers to keep and maintain good staff.
So challenging. And so I guess when it comes to psychosocial risks or hazards in the workplace, when we're thinking about this as a hazard, which it clearly is, there's obvious implications on mental health, on stress, on anxiety, actually for all retail team members or retail workers. I guess what I'm also interested in, because the physical spaces and the physical abuse and also the verbal abuse in customer-facing retail scenarios is one thing, but can you comment on what the research found around abuse that happens when you're not face-to-face with a customer?
It's a really good question. So all of the research that we've undertaken is research in situ. So in a store, in a fast food restaurant, talking to real staff in a face-to-face environment. But that's not how many businesses operate today. So we have a very strong e-commerce sector here in Australia. We spend about $82 billion online shopping. So, if you're buying something online and something goes wrong, you jump onto the site and you engage in a text correspondence, often with somebody at the other end. Or you might pick up a phone and ring somebody at a call centre or a help desk. Now, the challenge with that is that you rarely would you ring, say, a telco to say, hey, you're doing a great job. You only ring because something's gone wrong. You only ring, the iconic because something's gone wrong, your order's gone missing, or it's the wrong size, or it's been damaged. So already you've got the customer has a negative mindset before they go through the process. And what that then traditionally happens is they go through an extensive list of menu options. And interesting, just before we came on air today, I had to ring my health insurance provider. And I was looking at my phone, I was going through multiple options, and all I wanted to do was just confirm a couple of rebates. I was on hold and going through the menu options for 3.5 minutes before I could even talk to somebody. So you can imagine, as a customer who's already had a bad experience, as you start to go through that process, you're just getting more and more frustrated. You just want to get to the front of the line and get help. People in call centres behind a desktop watching emails come through, text messages come through, and trying to respond are really more highly exposed to abusive and aggressive behaviours than someone standing in front of you. There's this cloak of anonymity. I can sort of be quite abusive online.
Right.
So I think we really do need, research needs to be looking at, so how do we fix that problem? The SDA a few years back created that No One Deserves a Serve campaign, and it came to my attention because my daughter, who was working for a big supermarket at the time, came home and had a little badge that had, Grace, I'm someone's daughter, or I'm a daughter. And I like the idea of sort of personalisation, and we tested this and published the paper earlier this year. And it shows if you self-disclose, like I'm a mum, I'm a dad, the other one we looked at is I'm a local, it actually reduced the intentions to become abusive. So we gave about 1,000 customers a scenario of a poor service experience and then presented them with images of team members with these little underbadge treatments. And as soon as you self-disclose, it reduced it. The challenge, of course, though, with online or a call centre is you can't see that person.
No.
So really what we're looking at now is how can we self-disclose before a potentially frustrated, angry customer gets to talk to somebody? And it could be something like adding into that menu option before you go down that, that rabbit hole of menu options. Hi, thanks for calling today. My name's Gary. I'm a dad. You may be talking to me or maybe one of my friends, but please remember that we're just here to help you. Please be kind. A very simple exposure to say I'm a dad or I'm living in Melbourne or I like sport may sort of soften it a little bit. It's more verbal than obviously visual, and I think that's something we're yet to test.
The obvious point that came into my head, and you and I have been in enough conferences lately where AI is the central tenet and the hottest topic, chatbots and the ability for AI to almost circuit break. I'm wondering if that's on the radar in terms of future research, because in one way you can understand that it may create a little bit of a barrier. On the other, you can perhaps foresee that if all you want to do is talk to a human on the other end of a phone, then that's going to further incite you potentially. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think we're seeing significant advancements in AI and chatbots. I know that Woolworths has already got their Olive AI out there at the moment, so you can talk to Olive if you want to. And we've seen a bit of this also in sort of international retailers bringing in these AI bots. Businesses are at varying levels though, Nat. So the bot I talked to before we came to air, with my health insurance provider was a really clunky, it was a robot. It said, in a few words or less, what was the reason for your call? Hate that. And I said, I just want to check some premiums. And straight away it was, so you want to pay a premium? No, I just want to check some. So I didn't even understand me.
Yeah.
But when I was in Sydney last, there's a restaurant I go to in Castlereagh Street all the time. And I won't name it, but they have an AI assistant to take your reservations. They have 3 restaurants in Sydney. The last time I was in there, I rang and they picked up the phone, the AI did, and said, oh, hi, Gary, thanks for calling. And I went, how would they know it's me? But they went, oh, book. They'd have my telephone number, but it sounded like I was actually talking to a human person. Anyway, They say, listen, before we start, I just want to let you know that I'm actually an AI assistant, so I'm here to help you. And I had no idea. And we just had a natural conversation. I said, listen, I've just got into Sydney. Can I go to, is there a table available at sort of around about 6 o'clock? And I said, let me just check. And they said, yeah, we can get you at 6 or 6:15 or 6:30. On one time, the last time I was in, I made a mistake and they're about to book it for me. I said, oh, wait, not tonight. Tomorrow night. They went, oh, no problems. It was like, no problem. So it was very quite humanistic. So I do think that's a solution for the abuse, that we remove, I guess, initially the human element to it, because most people will ring with the same concerns, a missing size, a damaged product, or to question a transaction. Most will be able to be dealt with using AI without bringing a human into the conversation, therefore keeping them safer. And maybe you get them to a point where, okay, the AI can't fix this problem. It's quite unique and quite customized. Now we bring in the human at a later stage.
And I guess as well, how do you think about that in physical retail? When you're in bricks and mortar, I don't even want to go there because it's scaring me. But anyway, so in terms of technology and signage and security guards, are there other policy changes that you think will come with this, predominantly to, I guess, continue to attract people into the retail sector? It's a sector that has an amazing breadth of fantastic employment opportunities. You can learn a huge amount. We all know that. How do we continue to attract people into there? And how do we ensure that people are safe when they're at work? Do you foresee policy changes as a result of the research or anything else that you might be hearing?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's two. And from a policy perspective, we're starting to see this roll out across states and territories, although it's not completely national. That's those notion of workplace protection orders. So is that we're actually empowering police and retailers now to take action against repeat offenders. The challenge, of course, though, is that you need the technology to be able to identify who those repeat offenders are. And then, of course, you then need to resource the police so that they can apprehend and actually charge. And then you need to resource and also educate the judiciary so that they understand that, abusing a retail worker is quite a serious situation. Penalties need to be applied. It's a bit of a long bow to draw to sort of go, we've put this order in place. There's now a legislative control or a policy control in several states. We've still got a few more states and territories to go. That will keep workers safe. But if retailers don't have the technology, we can't identify the offender, the police are too busy, and the judiciary sort of treat this as a minor issue, it's not going to fix the problem. So a bit of work still to do in that policy area, and I'm not a policy advisor. The other research we do, we've written a couple of papers around sort of positive deviance or positive customer-focused deviance. When we hear the term deviance, we think about negative connotations. But this was all about sort of, bending and not necessarily breaking, but bending the rules or empowering team members to make decisions. And it sort of removes that issue of a situational factor. So I've picked up this product, it's scanned at the wrong price. Let's not debate the policy. Let's go, you can have it for free. It's a can of baked beans or it's a chocolate bar for $5. The research that we undertook shows that if you empower your team members to just be flexible, ignore the policy, just bend the policy a little bit, it just removes the angst. Customers feel happy. They see it as a more positive customer experience. Team members feel more confident to be able to make these decisions. They feel more trusted, and it leads to less sort of negative consequences like abuse or aggression. So from a policy area, there's three things. One is workplace protection orders. I think they're vital, but we need to resource police and obviously the judiciary correctly. Think about job fit, putting the right people into the right roles, and then think about positive deviance, enabling or empowering your team members just to bend the rules a little bit in order to deliver a positive outcome.
And I guess the other alternative is we have, it's interesting when you were talking about the Woolworths bot being called Olive. There must have been some very interesting closed-door conversations as to how to come up with that name. But again, you're humanising something. So I keep going back to the humanising of people who you are interacting with within a services sector. So very interesting. If people want to get a copy of the research, we'll make sure that we include a link. Otherwise, the research is available through the Services and Creative Skills Australia website, is my understanding.
Yeah, and also the QUC website is publicly available research. I'll certainly, you've got the link, so we'll share those as well.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much for your insights. It's a really fascinating area. No doubt there'll be more research that you and the team do in this space, but thank you for coming along, and it was great to chat.
Great. Thanks, Nat. Cheers.
If you found value in today's chat, the best way to support the podcast is to share it with a colleague. Make sure you hit follow or subscribe wherever you're listening. And I'm always eager to hear your takeaways, so do drop me a DM on Instagram at Inclusive Change or send me an email. All the links to connect with me and to learn more about today's guests are waiting for you in the episode description. Thanks again for being here, and I'll catch you next time.